In the years before Walt Disney World, the state's first theme park located in Winter Gardens, Florida was the #1 tourist attraction in the state. It was called Cypress Gardens. Welcome to Expedition Extinct. Richard Pope Sr. was a born showman and entrepreneur. His brother, Malcolm Pope, was a well-known speedboat racer and water skier in the 1920s. In 1926, Pope met his wife Julie in North Carolina. Julie had shown her husband a Good Housekeeping article about a man who had generated $36,000 in 1 year opening his garden estate to visitors, and that is how the idea was born for Cypress Gardens. They set about turning a marshland area in Winter Haven into a spectacular garden, set on the shore of Lake Eloise and built on the land of a former yacht club. The Popes began creating the gardens, and a team manually dug out canals throughout the land. During construction, several local residents were invited to open house events to see the progress of the gardens. They were dedicated by Florida Governor David Schultz on January 24, 1935. The formal opening of the park, though, would not occur until January 2nd, 1936. 182 visitors paid 25 cents to tour the pathway surrounded by lush plants from around the world. The gardens themselves featured thousands of varieties of flowers and plants on the 16-acre land, which would eventually grow to be as large as 200 acres. At this time, Interstate 4 didn't exist, and the main route through the state was US Highway 27, which took guests right past the front of Cypress Gardens. Dick Pope was seen as somewhat of a marketing expert and worked tirelessly to promote the park. In its early days, he distributed publicity photographs which featured the gardens, boats, models, and local personalities to multiple newspapers. He even was known to ask car manufacturers to bring their new cars into the park to be photographed for further publicity. Photography and its distribution played a huge part in the success of the park and public recognition. The old Yacht Club house, built in 1924 for the former yacht club, served as a park landmark until 1972. Moving on to the 1940s, a park tradition began by Julie Pope, which was the addition of one of the most famous and memorable aspects of the park, the southern bells. After a hard freeze damaged the vines that marked the park entrance, she asked the young women to dress up in hoop dresses to mask the damaged vines, assuring the park visitors that the botanical gardens were as beautiful as expected. Southern bells have gone on since then to greet visitors for more than 6 decades and become a symbol of Cypress Gardens. Most women who were Southern belles in the park grew up in Winter Haven and the surrounding areas. The first decade of the park's life was very much focused on the botanical gardens and offered a peaceful, colourful escape from the world.
The beauty of Florida can be found among the ancient cypress trees.
Dick Pope served stateside in the Army Signal Corps during the war, and the running of the park fell to Julie Pope. The park faced challenges from flagging attendance as hardships of the war fell all over the US. She kept the park in the media though and created the first water ski show, which ensured the future of the park. The ski show began one day when a group of soldiers came to the park asking when at the time the non-existent ski show would start. Julie Pope, though, replied at 3:30 p.m. without hesitation. That day, the first ski show began featuring her children, who were keen water skiers. The next week, 800 soldiers arrived to watch the show and the tradition began. The whole operation of the park was truly a family effort. Hundreds of troops visited during the wartime, in convoys up to 1,500, both to witness these early ski shows and as a break from training. Cypress Gardens was one of the few attractions that remained open during the war, and actually used its gas rations to provide ski lessons to the troops. The ski show became a staple of Cypress Gardens history. It became known as the water ski capital of the world, because it was the site of many of the sport's firsts, and over 50 world records were broken within the park's grounds. Many world-famous water skiers performed at the park. From 1947, the water ski show became a daily show. Boating had also become a huge part of the park's history. Boats were added to travel through the canals and the lake for park guests to enjoy. After World War II, Cypress Gardens generated substantial local publicity by crowning beauty pageant contestants at the park. As many as 100 beauty queens were crowned annually. It was during this time that the focus of the park began to change. The famous 100-foot Florida-shaped Esther Williams pool was constructed for her 1953 MGM romantic comedy Easy to Love. Most of that film was actually shot locally and ended with a sequence featuring many of the park's talented water skiers. Esther Williams returned to Winter Haven again to film the 1960 TV special, Esther Williams at Cypress Gardens. Johnny Carson would also film a special at the park called Johnny Carson Discovers Cypress Gardens. The park also received its fair share of celebrity visitors, including Muhammad Ali, John F. Kennedy, and even Elvis himself. During the 1950s, the park became increasingly popular, thanks in part to the Hollywood films and TV shows filmed at the location, as well as the persistent marketing effort by Dick Pope.
Walt Disney's Disneyland.
When planning Disneyland in the 1950s, Walt sent out people to look at different entertainment venues throughout the US. Dick Pope was in charge of the Central Florida Orange Festival that year, and had spent a large fee on arranging the appearance of Disney's costume characters. On around the third day of the exhibit, Roy Disney himself walked into the office and introduced himself to Dick Pope. He wanted to see how Cypress Gardens operated. He asked Pope questions about the financial and technical side of the operation and explored the area. Roy was shocked that some water skiers and flowers brought in the amount of people that it did. It wasn't long after this that Disneyland was announced. 1961 marked the 25th anniversary of the park, 10 years before the opening of Walt Disney World. In 1963, Cypress Gardens was tied with the Grand Canyon as the #1 tourist destination in the United States.
What is the World's Fair? Oh, it's a complex thing. Certainly doesn't lend itself to easy definition.
During the 1964-1965 New York World's Fair, the same one that had a huge Walt Disney influence with the Carousel of Progress.
Walt Disney, we're happy to welcome you to the fair. We know about your work and your achievements in many fields in Disneyland and elsewhere, and we want you to bring all your talent and genius to us.
One of its pavilions was a struggling Florida-based one. In 1965, Richard Pope was appointed president of the Florida World's Fair Authority, and is quoted as saying something must be done to improve the Florida exhibit. Pope convinced the state to invest $1 million and take over the amphitheater located adjacent to the fair. Pope spent $300,000 building a water track and created the Florida Citrus Ski Show, featuring legendary Cypress Gardens skiers. He also made the show completely free to see, so that helped. The new Florida exhibit attracted double the attendance of the previous year.
We have many things in mind that could make this unique and different than Disneyland.
Will it be a Disneyland?
Well, I've always said there will never be another Disneyland, Governor.
When Walt Disney announced the construction of Walt Disney World in 1965, Pope was supportive, believing that anything that brought more visitors to Florida would only help his business. He took out an ad in a newspaper and appeared on a short film welcoming Disney World. 1969 saw the addition of the most photographed aspect of the park, the famous wedding gazebo known as the Love Chapel, situated on the highest point of the Botanical Gardens. When Disney World opened in 1971, the area had a massive increase in tourism. After several years though, travel patterns in Florida started to shift. People spent more time at Walt Disney World and less venturing out south or to Cypress Gardens. Yet, the optimistic Pope still proclaimed the value of Disney in Florida in 1976. He said, as long as we show Southern hospitality, they would continue to come. The early 1980s also saw the Popes retire, and the park transferred to their son, Dick Pope Jr., who had been involved in the park for most of his life. 1983 saw the addition of the famous Island in the Sky attraction, which extends 150 feet into the air with up to 100 riders. Competition, though, at the time began to increase. In 1985, book publisher HBJ purchased the park for $23 million. After some additions, HBJ sold the business to Busch in 1989. Busch continued to operate the park and make additions until April 1995, when a group of the park's managers, led by Bill Reynolds, bought the property. The park opened until April 2003, when it closed following the tourism decline after 9/11, and 529 people were out of work with only 3 days' notice. February 2004, Adventure Parks Group purchased the property and renamed it Cypress Gardens Adventure Park. The company had enjoyed tremendous success as the owner of Wild Adventures in Georgia. Cypress Gardens had been serving families for over 70 years, and the company believed that combining the best of Cypress Gardens with the best of Wild Adventure, they would be able to attract modern families away from the Disney World area. The park returned in 2004 with a host of new attractions, including the Triple Hurricane, which was named after the tough storm season that had just passed through. Fiesta Express, Okeechobee Rampage, and Swamp Thing were a few of the rides added also. The attendance figures for 2005 actually doubled the projected number. The core of the old park had been thoughtfully preserved, and 2005 saw the addition of a water park called Splash Island, as well as a spinning roller coaster, Galaxy Spin. In September, though, the following year, Adventure Park Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, stating the reason was due to the amount they had to spend on repairs from the damages due to the 2004 hurricane. Land South Adventures purchased Cypress Gardens at auction in 2007 for only $16.9 million. The park announced it was closing in November 2008, but it reopened again in March 2009. All of the animals were removed, any rides left standing were not operating, and some of the rides were flat out sold and removed. The Gardens and Water Park began separate ticketing, and it was only 1 year later that it was announced that the park was closing, as they were unable to keep it running in the current climate. January 15th, 2010 saw the world's second largest theme park operator, Merlin Entertainment, announce they were buying Cypress Gardens, with the intent to use it for the 5th Legoland park. October 15th, 2011 saw that the park opened as Legoland Florida. Merlin stated that they would preserve the aspects of Cypress Garden, and the park was essentially flipped around. What was once the front of Cypress Gardens is now actually the back of Legoland. Nods to the past live throughout. Lego Southern Belles preserve a hint of the past as you enter the Cypress Gardens section of the park, and you can still actually see the original hand-dug canals as you walk through the gardens. The lush botanical gardens preserve the beauty of the original park, and the wedding gazebo still stands at the top of the botanical gardens, and other small remnants of the past can still be found throughout. The Island in the Sky was permanently closed after 34 years and was last operated in 2017. The ski show still exists, but with a Lego takeover, and some of the rides from the 2004 reopening were rethemed to fit into the Legoland theme. The iconic Florida pool can still be found, but it has been unused for years. This historically filled, decades-old first theme park in Florida still kind of exists, and you can still at least see parts of it, which is likely one of the better fates that the park could have ended up with. Without Legoland, who knows what the fate of these gardens would have been. At least a portion of this history gets to continue and live on today. Dick Pope Sr. passed away in 1988, but the legacy and impact he had on Florida tourism still lives on today. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe, and if you ever visited Cypress Gardens, please do let us know your memories of the park. We will see you next time.